one made questions, so.
So typically workflow, you start Ember CLI, craft a project, similar like we do with Laravel for the back end. Does it do routing and all that stuff as well?
So with Ember CLI, you're building all the client-side part of your application. So you are doing, usually you're doing URL-based routing, although we have done pages where we're just embellishing a lot of state on a single page. So we had one page that was sort of like a Netflix homepage kind of thing, looking at guitar statistics and different pictures and views for guitars. It was going up to like 200 pictures could be on the page at once, and you could zoom in, you could make comments on them, you could see professional opinions and all this kind of stuff. So we were having to deal with a whole ton of state. The URL never changed. And we were still doing that with Ember, although it does work happiest when you are using a URL, just because the web is really good because you can take that URL, you can share it, you can internally email it, and it gives you a place. I think if you've worked a little bit with either Angular Router or React Router, it lets you go ahead and kind of reboot the app wherever you're at in the same state, no matter where you are. So if there are some bugs, that URL kind of becomes the way that you know where to reboot your app.
Right.
Where if you didn't have that URL, you would have to do that all in local storage, which could have failed or anything like that. And the history API is pretty standard.
Gotcha. We're on the same page then. I work along the same line, so.
Yeah, right now we're working on a Phonegap based app, and I'm sitting here and we're recording over a CLI client-side web app for some sweepstakes and stuff, and we're porting that over to using Phonegap, and we're kind of like, well, how do you? It's a question of how do you want to manage that state and how do you want to keep it recallable, and that's a little bit for me to be like, it's sort of recallable with like the app URLs that iOS and Android give you, but it just doesn't feel as good as being able to just like email the exact place where you are, and they might have to authorize or like authenticate, but once they authenticate, they're exactly where you are and seeing everything you were seeing. So it's a little bit weird. This app's luckily relatively simple and only had about 2 URLs, so we're not having to lose too much feel and recallability on it, but it feels weird. So cool. It sounds like Eric, you kind of asked me to go ahead and cover some of my opinions of the future of some of these different frameworks. We've got you were talking about Angular and Ember to start off with, but I think we'll probably, with React Conference just having happened, what was it, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we'd probably cover and talk a little bit about that as well, and where kind of the future of the web is. And I don't want to say completely that we might say who you want to put your money behind, but maybe give a good idea of what works good, what framework works well for different types of teams or different types of projects. So you've worked, it sounds like, a decent amount in Angular 1.0, and it sounds like you were fairly happy with it, or?
Yeah, I'm quite happy with it. I mean, I threw 1.4. I've worked with their beta. I don't want to lose a lot of that thought process and JavaScript mentality that we've got right now, even going to ES6. It just seems, from what I've done with NG2, it's a big paradigm shift of thought process. You know, a lot of what we've done today is going to be out the door. So I thought, okay, you know, even if I go to React, it's still a different learning curve. But I figured I may as well entertain Ember as well, because I know that there's a strong community behind Ember, and I don't see a huge paradigm shift in the way they do things, at least that I'm aware of, coming, let's say, in a year and a half from now.
Right. Yeah, and
So,
that's what's really impressed me most with Ember. I've been working with Ember since early pre 1.0 days, even pre-release candidate, and the API back then was very different. Luckily, I kind of stuck through it because I was feeling I'd come from working in sort of Java GUI and had played around with back in the days C# and J# coding Windows, and then when I got a Mac, kind of played around with Cocoa a little bit, and I felt really good about making these rich client applications and rich state applications on the web in kind of a similar fashion of how you're managing a data store, how you're managing where your state is coming from. So, when you first boot up an app, what do we need to go grab? What do we need to pull in? And Ember just seemed to have a story from the very beginning that was very in line with coming from a traditional GUI programming aspect, and it didn't feel like it's trying to reinvent the wheel. It's definitely making progress on it. But of the frameworks that I was looking at the time, it seemed to look the most at the past and say, okay, we've been doing these computer things and been doing GUIs for quite a while now. Some of the team had even come from Apple and Sprout Core 2. And then I was just looking at the team, and I've heard this a lot when talking to people about Ember is, yes, the framework was impressive. Yes, the vision was impressive, but also some of the people behind it seem to have a good vision. They seem to take projects that they've worked on in the past and bring them to a good spot. Yehuda Katz, I think he had worked on, I can't remember if it was Rails 2 to Rails 3, I believe, and he had worked on kind of making it more modular, making it a little bit more user-friendly so that you could bring in things. And he brought some vision, helped kind of centralize things in the Rails community. He seemed to work really well with the Rails community. He had worked really well as a community manager with the jQuery project, and it just seemed like a good thing to put money behind him, knowing how to run a community, knowing how to make things work for a broader audience, but still feel really good for the general developer doing things in their convention. So it's convention-driven, but being able to very quickly, not very quickly per se, but if you wanted to, you could grab down all the way in the guts of Ember and change something without affecting too much of the other bits of the framework. You can swap out a view layer or a routing layer. There's very few people that do it just because the conventions are so strong and work for 90% of the use case. But if you wanted to, there's a hypothetical way of being able to go in and pull out these single modules and swap them out.
What is the concept of Ember Data? Is that just their data connector, I'm assuming, to databases, or can you elaborate on that?
So Ember Data is a data abstraction library. So what it's doing is it's giving you the ability to go ahead, and it works well with the conventions of the rest of the framework. But if you've worked with, any data store, you may have known of, like, okay, I grab the first ID, and I've grabbed the object on my index page, and then I need to go onto the show route and show it. Well, you've got that in your state machine. Why do you need to go ahead and grab it again? So Ember Data does a little bit of that, but it's an abstraction for all of your different data stores. So on the course that I made with Ember grep, you go ahead and just make a bunch of plain JavaScript objects in an array and pump that into what's called the fixture adapter, which is basically what you get at runtime, or what you get on page load is your data store, and it's all in memory, it's all in JavaScript, and it's kind of right there for you to work with. But with Ember Data, you're able to take something that's working with that fixture adapter, swap it out for the JSON REST adapter, and point it to your API and go right there, and everything still works the same way. All of your saves, all of your finds, all of your updates, everything is still working without you having to rip out all of your code in your controllers or your components. And you're really just changing this one little adapter or the serializer, which is how you kind of interpret data from JSON payload or a WebSocket or whatever.
Would that be a fair comparison to something like Eloquent?
It's hard to compare it to something like Eloquent or Active Record and Rails. It definitely does serve some things of being able to say. It definitely does serve the idea of keeping kind of your data associated by IDs, and API is very similar to kind of an Active Record implementation. Definitely, and that's definitely purposeful, coming from a lot of the community in Ember originally was Rails community, so they wanted it to feel very similar to Rails. But if you would think of Active Record or Eloquent being able to say, okay, instead of connecting to MySQL or Postgres or even Mongo, there's some adapters for Mongo. You're able to then say, okay, instead of that, I'm going to go ahead and drop everything and use Firebase instead.
Right.
And you just do this, and you're able to write this small translation layer that's associated with your model, and you can even do it at a model level. So your user model could be associating with your local database. Everything else could be shooting off to Firebase, and you could have this one model actually pulling from like a Google Maps API or anything like that. So it's a big abstraction of being able to make things work a little bit smoother and give you a consolidated API for working across multiple data sets.
So let's say we're going the Angular route. Excuse me. And it's a bunch of HTTP, GET puts, whatever, all over the place. Does Ember Data or Ember follow that same paradigm, or does it work more like an Active Record where it doesn't matter what you're going after, you just got the model and you've got saves and edits and stuff off of that?
Now, so you're saying, you're asking if we're doing raw JSON or raw jQuery query?
Yeah, I'm typically from Angular, I hit an API, so I'm going to do a bunch of HTTP requests, whether it be a GET or whatever. Does Ember follow that same thought process? Am I doing the same thing in Ember to access data? Am I doing an HTTP request?
So you can do that kind of in a few different ways. You could go ahead and write in your model. You could use an HXR request, or you could use like jQuery.getJSON. There's a few examples of using that. So if you didn't want kind of the weight of Ember Data, you're just saying, hey, I need to grab this array of data. I just want to data bind it real quick onto the screen and do a few things. You can do everything that you wanted in just regular JavaScript.
Without Ember Data even introduced in, is what you're saying?
Yeah, you can completely pull Ember Data out of the equation and just use your regular jQuery or XHR request. But
so does jQuery? I'm assuming that it works well with Ember. It's a dependency? Would you say?
So right now it is a dependency. In Path to 2.0, it's going to be less of a requirement. Right now they are using it some with handlebars and the view layer, but they're pulling more of that out to being more native raw DOM elements as they're starting to work on a idea of using similar to React, a virtual DOM of being able to diff real DOM elements and only change the small pieces of the DOM that they need to. The jQuery right now is a dependency, so if you want to use jQuery, that's kind of in there for free. As the road to 2.0 goes along, not required to use it, but if you still want to, it's there's no competition in APIs.
I have no problem with jQuery at all. I mean, I like most of the web community use it a lot, and I personally don't see it as a bottleneck, I guess, until you move to mobile. With jQuery on mobile, in your experience, how is it operating?
I actually haven't seen too many issues with jQuery on mobile. Most of our clients we're either doing intranet or kind of stand-up pages. We do a lot of sweepstakes pages at work. So we're supporting mostly a lot of newer browsers and newer mobile. And we haven't run into too many issues with jQuery. That being said, we've also moved over to using is it jQuery 2.0 that's kind of gotten rid of the corrupted older devices. But Ember does have a story, and I think that you may at this point need to explicitly say that you want to support older browsers. But I know that there are people working in like healthcare industries where they're supporting healthcare and government, where they're supporting all the way down, I think, to like IE7. I don't want to say IE6. I want to say I've heard it before, but I don't want to be put on record as being like, yeah, there's definitely Ember apps out there fully supporting IE6.
I maintain a project that's with Southern California's Edison, our local utility power. And we've actually been able to get them to move to modern browsers, i.e. So I hate to support IE6, 7, even 8, and I guess if I've got the liberty to go to 9, 10, or 11, that's a positive for me, and I can use modern tools without a problem, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and that's what I like. That's what I kind of like about the ideas of either the future of Ember or the future of kind of jQuery 2.0 is, okay, if I want to, there's still long-time support for something like or jQuery 1.11, where they've got an LTS of being able to say, okay, if you want to support down to this version, then you can go ahead and pull in 1.11. You might not get some of the new hotness, but 2.0 is almost completely backwards compatible, just with supporting only newer browsers. And I like that path of being able to say we're going to support a new way of thinking, but we're not going to drop behind everybody, and we're going to make a very smooth transition.
One of the UI elements that I've got to support a lot of is still the traditional table, but a small amount of columns, whether it be 3 or 4 columns. But I do need to do the live filtering, and that's something that I really like out of Angular. Does that exist in Ember?
Yeah, so with Ember, there's a few different ways that you can do that, and one of the ways that you would be able to do that is there's like a native layer of almost object-oriented concepts called Ember Model that like includes like it includes an object provider, includes kind of an array wrapper, includes a lot of different things, and what that allows you to do is it allows you to like you can wrap things in something called an array proxy, which will it'll kind of defer promises if you're like returning a data set from jQuery.getJSON. It could defer that promise and make that promise act like an array. You can filter data on that data set by saying, here's my filter by property. It will look in all of your different objects inside of that array and look at like the created date key, and you can sort by that ascending, descending. So you can work with those array proxies. There was originally a story called Array Controller that works similar to like Marionette's collection view that allows you to do that inside of the controller. But they're trying to they actually was just deprecated lately because one of the things that we were finding in the Ember community was that we started relying more and more on controllers starting to act like arrays or controllers acting like objects, and it became a little bit confusing. And I know a lot of people from the React world were like, make it a little bit more explicit. In the Backbone world, we're coming around and saying, you don't have to make it so explicit that you render all the time, you're firing every render command or anything like this, but do make it explicit of filter by is on your controller, but it's actually modifying this model that's behind the controller, and that got, I know that got a little bit confusing, so they're trying to clean that up and make it a little bit more explicit. So you could have a button fire an action that says filter by, or an input control that, like a select that says sort by. So you could, select on change, you could then say model or collection or whatever you're calling it inside your controller. You could say model.filter by and model.set filter by, and you can filter it by whatever you want from that select box.
Does Ember follow the same paradigm where you attach function names like a button, for example, or a button, that you attach a function to the controller, or does it work with more of an abstraction like service name?
So say that again. Sorry, it was.
I guess I'm guessing one is does Ember follow the thin controller process, or do you offload the services and all your services like you would in Ember, or is it just that controller, more of the codes at the controller level?
So actions are usually controlled by either your component, your controller, or your route. So if you're in a component, it's very clear to the idea of components in the spec for web components. So an action taken inside of a component won't bubble up unless you're explicit about it. So you have to bind that action. So if you had like a click event on your component, you would have to say click inside of your handlebars template. You would say click equals, and then your action handler inside of your next parent up. But once you get into the controller and route space, it then bubbles through your application. So your let's say you're in users.show.post. So it's all the posts for a particular user. And then Ember allows you to nest your views inside of things. So you could have just some generic information for all of your users' routes, just saying, here you are, breadcrumbs or whatever. Then you could then have just a small blurb about what your user you're in on the user.show route, and then inside of the post route, you could have all your posts. So an action fired inside of that post would first try to find anything on a controller or route for users.show.post, and then it would bubble it up to the next controller, until it gets all the way up to the application. So one of the things I like to do is have an alert action. So I can fire that alert action from anywhere in my application, and then it's handled at the application level, and that will fire off either like a bootstrap alert or an alert box or a modal or anything that I want, and that's then abstracted away. So if the client comes and says, okay, we don't want these alerts popping up at the top of the page, we want something to pop over, we can just override the alerts, and it works everywhere.
Gotcha. So the application level more handles a lot of I guess the generic tasks, etc.
Yeah, the way that we might handle is global state, if we want to save what user we're using, or pop, like the big things that we do are alerts, modal, user state, user session state, that kind of stuff. Is we're usually pushing that action all the way up to the application layer, and then taking whatever we need to do there.
Let's say, for example, in loadout, And you want use routines available everywhere. Are they just as a simple library all the same? Are they attached to application or what?
What was that now?
Let's say you load and have access to all those routines. Is when you load that global. Like if I were to name a dependency injection on that, and bring on that same Ember.
Right. So the different ways that you could do that with Ember is if you grab just the starter kit off of emberjs.com. Sorry. If you were just to grab that starter kit, which is a zip, and it's got like some index.html files, some base CSS files, and it's got Ember Data. It's got the Ember Data release client and the latest stable version of Ember and the latest stable version of Handlebars, and you have to kind of include everything yourself. The way that works is everything is globals. But if you're working with Ember CLI, which is kind of the suggested path now for everybody, because it gives you a full story of being able to run a development server with live reloads, you can make your CSS go ahead and load in dynamically, so you could include Bootstrap and 20 different vendor libraries. They'd all get compressed, minified. So it gives you a full development story and full build story. What that does is it's using ES6 modules, so you import, and if the library you're using can support ES6 modules or can support AMD or Require.js, there's shims for that. Sort of like Require.js, or sort of like oh, I'm dropping the ball. It's been so long since I've used another module loader, but
So is it browser?
What is that?
What browser module? Where you wrap your functions with another module.
So everything ends up getting put in. You have all your files for your controllers, your models, everything, and you're importing one by one in those files. So you're saying that I want Ember, so I import Ember from string Ember. So if you import Lodash in its AMD version, and you set that to model the model Lodash, there may even be a current add-on for Ember CLI that allows you to do that. If you import, then you can go ahead and import underscore from Lodash. But if there's something similar to like Validator.js right now, doesn't have any AMD support or anything. It just builds itself as a global when you're using it on the browser side of things. And the way that I do that is I just go ahead and go into my JS hint file, and I just use it as a global still. So like jQuery can still use it as a global.
All right, okay, so that makes sense. I got you. Okay, so back to Ember, services, right, and that sort of thing. I'm assuming that Ember doesn't work in HTML layer. Is there something similar to an Ember package, a custom package for Ember, or a library, of third-party Ember packages?
I'm having a lot of trouble. It's like crackling all your vocal. Is that happening to me on your side as well?
Yes.
I'm wondering if. Can you try reloading and seeing if that helps us out?
Yeah, sure.
Mike, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I gotcha.
Okay, that's better.
Let's see if this one works.
Maybe that's a little bit easier. And it's been happening for a little bit, but it's been getting worse like every minute or so. So hopefully this fixes it now.
Okay, let me clarify that question. So is there a community of third-party packages a la what Angular offers, a lot of different services or directives or something like that?
I wouldn't say that it's quite as I wouldn't say that it's quite as active as Angular's directive services, and being able to just include components. There is a story for that, and now with Ember CLI, that story's become a lot easier. So now, for instance, I built a code highlight component that you're able to go in, and in anything you're able to say like curly curly. The component syntax is like you do curly brace to open handlebars. You hit pound, you put in a pound symbol, and then you type in the name of your component. And then you can wrap anything you want into it. You can pass in properties inside that opening tag, and then you have a closing tag, which is curly brace / and then close it. So anything inside of that works kind of like a web component. They're moving to, in 2.0, oh no, it's happening again. They're moving to more of a HTML syntax. Let me try resetting on my side. Mike, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got you.
Oh, geez, it's happening. I do not know what's going on. Let me try. Give me a second.
You there?
Mike, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what the crackle is. If you go to emberaddons.com, you can see there's a whole variety of Ember add-ons that you can pull into Ember CLI. So you will do, I think it's Ember install. So when you're using the Ember command line, or you can do it just with npm install, and you pull in any of these add-ons, it will then go ahead and, like, some of them are like Ember Paper gives you a bunch of components for working with Google Material Design, and it lets you work on, I think they're saying that it's based on kind of the components built in Angular material. And then some of these add-ons even have a story for, like, some of them are for deployment, so you can deploy to S3 and you just add to your configuration variable S3, and all it affects is the build. Other ones add new web components for you to work with in Ember, and then even other ones still go ahead and just add CSS even. So there's kind of a whole variety of things, and it's not just limited to working with the components that you're adding. So you can add on a whole bunch of functionality and features.
Gotcha.
To your app.
That's basically what I was looking for. I mean, not that there's something specific, but it seems like a pretty good library here to choose from.
Yeah.
So I got you there. Okay.
I guess one of the things, I know that we've talked a little bit about it, but one of the things that's really exciting for me right now with Ember is the road to 2.0. I know you had been saying you were scared of Angular 2.0 because it's just completely a shift. I definitely have my opinions on that as far as versioning. Yeah, so basically, and I think I've said this a little bit on Twitter, but I haven't been too vocal on it, is so the shift from Angular 1.0 to Angular 2.0 feels a lot like Ember's shift when it was going from Sprout Core 2 over to Ember and then over to Ember. And while I know that a lot of the team still wants to stay there and a lot of the core team wants to kind of stick around and work on this movement from one thing to another. I think it gives you a limited path that now something that feels very similar or would be kind of a Simver version 2.0 now can't keep the same namespace. So if something's kind of keeping on the legacy by saying Angular 2.0, which is almost not backward compliant at all, I don't think that there's almost anything that you can pull over, except for the crazy names, which some of them they even got wrong in programming. And just some of them they absurdly named, saying that this is a designer-friendly framework, and then use terms that even programmers kind of scoff at. But it's just really interesting that they went ahead, and I know that they wanted to keep kind of this branding and everything that they had worked on, and kind of this clout that they had, but it feels a little bit of a disservice to be able to say, like, okay, Angular 2.0 has very, very little to do with Angular 1.0, and looking at React and even Backbone and Marionette and everything, there's definitely a story to move forward, but there's also a story to be like, okay, what's your upgrade path? Because we need an upgrade path. We can't be we either need an upgrade path or we need a long-term support kind of policy. And it just feels like Google and the Angular team hasn't done either of those. There's no upgrade path, and they've kind of said, hey, by the way, we've been doing this in the dark for 4 months, and we're not really going to support Angular 1.0. So
I agree.
It's been a little bit weird, and it hurts me to say this, but I feel a little bit the same with React, and it scares me that that kind of all the muscle behind, not all the muscle with React, but because I know that there is a strong community involvement. But I'm almost feeling that if Facebook wanted to go ahead and say, we're either not going to work on React anymore because we've figured out this new thing, and they've done this a lot. If you look at PHPX, I think it's called, or XHP or whatever it's called, it's like basically React for PHP, and there's little to no support for it anymore. And I know that there's a lot of community involvement with React, and I don't think it would quite have the drop off of the shelf, but you're very much at the mercy of just this mega corporation. But that also means that it could be supported for a while. So it's,
I think it's that mentality right there that you outlined that has me wondering: is this the time now to get on a different ship, or because from all the stuff I've done with 2.0 and I've seen, it's starting over for all intents and purposes. It really is.
Yeah.
So do you take your existing JavaScript knowledge and even ES6 and move that into something else, i.e. Ember, which is why I started dialogue with you, because what's to say that once they get 2.0, then I don't see LTS support. I mean, I know they're working on 1.4 and 1.5, but I think that's just to pacify us until 2.0 gets there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd say that it is kind of a hard decision, because Angular 2.0, there's a lot of things that I like in it, looking at it. There's still a lot of stuff that's up in the air, and there's a lot of things that I'm kind of looking at it, I'm like, I really hope that there's a way to opt out of this decision you've made.
Right.
But that being said, I'd say that like 75 or 80% of the direction that they're heading is good. But unfortunately, 100% of me feels burned that there's no backward support, and I'm sitting here with a library of tutorials and stuff that I've been wanting to watch on Angular, because we've got some Angular apps to support, and I'm kind of sitting here like, is that worth my time? Like, really reading it? Because none of it's going to be applicable.
That's just going to be a select all and delete, because it's
right.
Not
yeah.
do us any good. Right.
And I'm definitely one for saying that there are times where you need to burn the bridge, and you've learned a lot. But there's a lot of apps that work, and just to embellish one more thing, or add a security update, or add a performance update, man, like we've we've even upgraded apps from from Ember release candidate 1 to a stable version. And there were some major breaking API changes, but for the most part, it was like add dashes here, add dashes there. You have to use set because we stopped using this object.observe shim that was really slow and unperformant. I mean, the upgrade path, it took time. But it was straightforward. There was things that you could do, and there were still gotchas. Luckily, there was a lot of tooling for it. There's deprecation warnings in the console, so if you're running the development build of Ember JS, this is one of the coolest things that I think about Ember, is that there's different builds. There's a development version, there's a production version, and then there's minified versions of both. So the development version will go ahead and it has all of the comments, which honestly the comments is the entire documentation on the website. It's auto-generated. So like if a stack trace leads you to line 200 in in Ember Model, or in like a route, like the route control or the route class, you can then just scroll up like 12 lines and see all of the documentation for how routes are supposed to work. And that's in the development build, but it also has assertions for like things that are about to be deprecated, and so it warns you about that. There's the Ember developer tools that now have a deprecations panel, so you can pull up an old app and say, hey, I want to move from 1.3 up to 1.10. And it will tell you everything that would be affected. It would give you red warnings of, hey, this doesn't work at all anymore, and here's the shim. This one's, this line of code is about to be deprecated in the next major or minor version. So, here's what it is. Here's the blog post of why, and that just feels really good for me. But along those lines, Ember will also do assertions on your code and help you do longer stack traces while in development mode. While for performance and for total code size, it goes ahead and minifies that. And I think that right now, the development version of Ember is like up to 1.2 megs unminified. So if you have all the comments, all the assertions, it's up to like 1.2 megs. But that's scared, and there's a lot of blog posts I've seen that people are like, oh, Ember's huge, like it's 4 times the size of even all of the other frameworks combined. And they're pulling in the development version with all the assertions, all the test case, and all the massive, huge documentation, which most people say is like one of the best out of all the frameworks. And they're pulling all of that, and they're like, oh, it's 1.2 megs. Well, the development version, I think, right now of Ember, I will have to double check, but the development version is tiny in comparison. Or the production version is tiny.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Well, that in and of itself would give me comfort. Wow, that's pretty nice.
Yeah, the production version minified and gzipped is 100K. But the other thing that I really like about Ember is just they do have a very clear vision of being able to support their developers, and it's built by much more than Tom, Yehuda, and the guys at Tilda. I mean, there's a huge community. Just today or tomorrow, one of the core contributors is now being brought on to Google to work full time just on Ember, or not on Google, by Yahoo. Sorry, Stefan Penner, who's the guy who created Ember CLI. He's brought on by Yahoo, but he's only one of the core contributors, and he's over there. So I like to see that. It's like kind of on the other side of the fence of something like React or Angular, where Angular was kind of like a pet project within Google. All the core team is Google people. You have 1 or 2 people that they bring in, and they kind of, honestly, like a lot of the core team, they try to hire into Google, which always felt really weird to me. And then React's kind of the other way. The majority of the core team is at Facebook, but they seem really active to listen to the community. They do need to still fit their needs, but they have ways to. It seems like it's also really hard to compare because it's a much thinner framework than Angular or Ember as far as just what you get out of the box. It's got a smaller and much more concise and much more focused scope.
Well, now you actually scares me. It's all embedded in the core. It's all embedded in Facebook because I Facebook reputation is the entire side and just leave it behind. And they try to do dark didn't take off, so then they re-engineer themselves and stuff and call ad script.
Right.
It's that. I just feel like they're going to get tired of the project something like who's it good for? That's why I look at Ember. It's not just so, it looks like it's coming in the core guys one matter movie, but they are different walks of life to those things.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that I do like though that so you have kind of this core team that comes from all sorts of different backgrounds, but if you look at them, they're being supported by huge companies. Right now, like Tilda is on hire, I think, for like 2 or 3 months by Buffer to work on performance in Ember. Or not Buffer, Bustle, which is a big kind of like, I can't remember if they're owned by a parent company, but they're a news and kind of gossip mag. Really cool site, and it's all built in Ember, and it's SEO compliant, and it's one of the coolest things because they're just able to add really cool user interaction to something that was usually flat. And news articles, you're usually, especially like clickbait news article sites, you're usually used to completely server rendered. You click on a page, and then it has to completely pull in every other ad and everything. Where they're able to do that all with Ember, so it's some of it animates, and they can add user interactions to like a particular article. I know that the New York Times, when they were first building Backbone, I think it was like for a political tracker, was their big story. And they built Backbone, and they were like, oh yeah, if you work at the New York Times, there's like this big server of libraries that we can pull onto the page, and we can reference them. But at Bustle, I think it's Bustle. I hate to possibly have that wrong. At Bustle, it's like they've already got Ember on the page, so if they want to add advanced user interactions to a single page, they can do that. They don't have to go and pull in a new library or have to worry about completely breaking their flow. It's like advanced user interactions are bought in by the start, and I think that's a good thing to be putting into. So you've got Bustle, you've got Yahoo. Netflix worked with Eric Brin for it's an internal tool, but they built, I think, their entire notification and like server kind of dashboard. They built a big internal tool of being able to watch like server analytics and viewership analytics and all this kind of stuff. And so I'm just hearing more and more big names backing it and putting their money and their people behind the core team, which that's like it's kind of weird to say. Like I hate like big companies backing frameworks in one sense, but it's a whole different interaction with the community, I feel like.
There's more outside of the single such as I just going or you might what was it? He wasn't that a Yachty object project or something? They just dumped because that's another thought process. I guess it's all source, but I became a project, but hopefully it sticks around. We're it seems like here we give value what it's what is built project.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm at right now.
Cool, man. So do you have any other lasting questions? I think the sound's kind of giving out on us, and we're just about rounding an hour.
I really know what started this up on the NG person, and you have to bet like your thought process there is where I'm along. I just have to jump in your world. Any resources you could recommend that are good for Ember.
1 second. Can you try restarting? Because I'm having a huge sound issue, so I just want to round this out with a little bit of clear audio, hopefully. All right. Hopefully we can get clear for like the last 5 minutes.
There we go.
So
Good solid resources you'd recommend for good content on learning Ember.
yeah. So one of the things that I would say is they are slightly out of date because now, like I say, the best convention is to go into Ember CLI. There is a blog article if you look up Ember CLI to do. And someone did which is the starter guide on Ember, and they did the entire to-do MVC. They built it all with Ember CLI, so you can kind of go through the idea. To-do MVC is actually really, especially now that everybody's going into routing, to-do MVC is kind of I think it's a bad example just because it doesn't show the power of some of these things of being able to manage a ton of state.
Right.
But it at least gets your feet wet. The other thing that I would say is if anyone's looking at working with Ember, I do have a course on embergrep.com that is called Zero to Prototype, which is using Ember CLI to build out a full like basically what we build out is a band page with some rich interactions. So we're going to pull in some things that I work on a day-to-day basis of things that you would usually do on a static site. So you're going to pull in a bunch of news articles, and we're going to make it so that you can have not really a breadcrumb, but sort of a breadcrumb that active reloads of being able to click back to like the home page for all your news articles. You can we're going to build a reactive slider that's dealing with state. So you're being able to work with web components in that and being able to say, okay, here's the current state of my slider and trying to move back and forth. We work a little bit on animations. They're not perfect. I'm not a designer or an animation guy. So there's definitely some edge cases of like when you go all the way to the end, it has a little bit of jitter to it, and that's just because I didn't work with velocity so much to optimize that. And I wanted to get it into a shorter time frame. And then we pull in like external widgets and we refactor kind of external jQuery soup. So there's one episode where I say, okay, you have an existing piece of jQuery for like a ticker tape at the bottom, grabbing things from an AJAX source. And this is using no Ember data, nothing. You're just grabbing regular jQuery code, and we take what was jQuery soup, and then we add state to it, we add configuration variables, and we build this all into a web component. So you can stick it at the bottom of the page. You can it's all using Filorama's API, so you can change like what show you're getting it. You can change the speed that this ticker is going to move at. So we refactor that. We wrap something like Twitter's timeline widget, which if you've ever used Twitter.js, it's really annoying to do anything except for like on a static page of loading it in. So we actually put stuff and break down what's happening in their gzipped minified grossness, and we kind of extract what makes sense to extract, so you can change what user you're wanting to grab, what link you're wanting to show if for some reason the Twitter widget fails to load or anything like that. So we build and componentize around that. And then the entire application's using Ember Data for the news articles, so we're using a local in-memory thing. So I know I talked a little bit about fixtures. So fixtures are just local. We have them local to our project, and then in the course that I'm working right now, it's actually huge. It's 22 lessons versus the first 12 that I did for the prototype course. Which that one covers how to build entire API services and admin panels with Express.js, and then the back end of that course looks at, okay, now we have an API. How do we connect an existing Ember app into this API using Ember Data? And we had this fixture adapter, and I think even my raw data or even my raw video, which I recorded and made a ton of mistakes recording it, I think the entire raw video was 15 minutes of me changing from a fixture adapter, which was all local, to moving over to using an API server.
Excellent. I'll definitely look at that then, Ryan. Fantastic.
It was just a few things. And the other thing that I would look at is Evil Trout, which is the guy that builds out Discourse. He's got a blog. I don't know if he's updated it too much, but he talks a lot about kind of hacking Ember Core. One of the things that I learned big from him was I was stuck in render loop evilness with video elements because you can't swap out the sources by the HTML spec, even though Chrome lets you do it twice, which is weird. So it's like I would have video, because Ember grep's all built in Ember, and so I would have videos, and you would go from lesson 1 to lesson 2 to lesson 3. The video would stay on the page. You'd click to go to lesson 4, and the entire page layout would break because Chrome's like, okay, we let you break the rules like 3 times, and now we're just gonna say stop it. So that was a real interesting thing. So I had to, and it felt a lot like Backbone, but it still felt clean of being able to tell Ember manually for this part of the page, I'm going to tell you what to render, I'm going to tell you how to render it and when to render and do all those bindings. So instead of trying to inject in live reload, I just trash the entire view element, or I trash the video element. I restart my my view event handlers, or my video event handler. So I trash that entire video element and create a new DOM element on the page, and I just do it in manual JavaScript. And so I learned that from Evil Trout, and that was kind of a trick up my sleeve. And I'm trying to think of anything, any other good sources. There's a Ember CLI book on LeanPub that's pretty good. I haven't gotten through it, and he keeps updating it a lot. So he's tracking along a little bit faster than I can doing videos and doing having kind of my day job. But he's tracking along pretty well on some best practices to do with Ember CLI. He talks about add-ons, and that's another good resource for Ember. I'm trying to think of any other things to look at.
Is there anything like a Laracast for Ember?
That's what I'm trying to eventually make Ember grep work into. Unlike Jeffrey, I do kind of have my 9 to 5, so it's not quite as fast on pickup for Ember right now. But I would say from what I've seen, other than there's a core team like enterprise training that's really good, but it's also enterprise training, so it's it's 8 hours, and I think it's like $600 or $700 or something. So there's
enterprise it means you charge big bucks. Gotcha.
Right. I mean, it's a full video of they do a day training building what is almost a RDO clone, and they're doing some of that with test-driven development, and I think they even build a Rails server alongside of it as well. So it's a big course. I would say that it's worth the money if you want to go down that road, but I just know that the cost and the time of sitting down for 8 hours and plopping down $600 for some video files is a lot for a lot of people. So
I hear you. Ryan, I really, really appreciate your time. It's very nice of you to do this, and
no problem.
A lot of good food for thought here. So if I have any lingering, I'll bounce you on Twitter or whatnot, but I really appreciate it.
No problem, Mike, and thanks for your time.
You're welcome. Have a good day, buddy.
You too.
Take care.